This is Passages. It's our summer offering. If it's your first time here, welcome. We are the Philosophical Research Society, founded in 1934 by Manly Hall. And our mission is to help seekers find meaning, not just once, but over and over, because as we learned last week, all things flow and everything is in flux. In Passages, we take just a passage and I provide some context for it, and then we look for a way to wisdom through the text, right? So this is what we do here. It's great fun. We have a great staff to do it, and let's get started. Our text tonight is the Diamond Sutra. Very interesting, as you'll see. And the passage is this. So you should view this fleeting world, a star at dawn, a bubble in a stream, a flash of lightning in a summer cloud, a flickering lamp, a phantom, and a dream. All right, so context. Here's a little bit about the Buddha. And I'm just going to borrow Catherine Seelig Brown's description, because there are a lot of descriptions of the Buddha's life, but I really like the way she puts this together. So there is dates 563 to 483. Remember last week Heraclitus is right in here too, so Buddha is part of the axial age, for those who like to think of history in those terms. Not far off from Confucius and Lao Tzu and the Hebrew prophets and others. Zoroaster may be in there, but we can't really pin him down. Anyway, those are his dates. It's possible he lived as much as a century later, because we're in difficult territory in terms of date, but he was from the Shakya clan, and so you might hear him referred to as Shakyamuni, the Buddha, which means the sage of the Shakya clan. And like every founder of a world religion, he has lots of stories around his birth. And these are fascinating, kind of annoying, because you don't really need this. You know, they're the teachings. But okay, let's tell some great stories about his birth. And these are great stories. His mother, Maya, by the way, that's his mother's name, conceived him, and when she dreamed that a white elephant entered her right side. She gave birth to him in a standing position while grasping a tree in a garden. And the child emerged from Maya's right side fully formed and proceeded to take his first steps. Okay, I don't know why we have to do this, but sure, he was amazing at birth and before birth. Once back in the palace, he was presented to an astrologer who predicted that he would become either a great king or a great religious teacher, and he was given the name Siddhartha, he who achieves his goal. Okay. His father, evidently thinking that any contact with unpleasantness might take him off his path as a prince, and lead him to seek life as a religious teacher, as it had been forecast, protected him from the realities of life. So, poverty, disease, old age, death were not known to this young prince. He grew up surrounded in a comfortable palace. He was part of the warrior caste. And at age 29, here it is, right? Age 29, 30 is early 30s. Stuff happens right then. You might get crucified, etc. You might hear the voice of Allah in a cave. It always happens around this time. You might be asked to go into Egypt and lead your people out. At 29, he made 3 successive chariot rides. Actually, I think Moses was much older, so don't count Moses in that. At age 29, he made 3 successive chariot rides outside the palace grounds, and he saw an old person, a sick person, and a dead person, all for the first time. And so on the 4th trip, he saw a holy man, which in India at this time and throughout time would have been an ascetic, most likely, a person who denies the body not only its pleasures, but its needs, as we would define many of them, in order to achieve enlightenment. So this ascetic hermit inspired Siddhartha to follow a similar path in search of freedom from suffering, the infinite cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. He knew his father would try to stop him, so he left the palace in the middle of the night, and he sent all his belongings and jewelry back with his servant and horse. And so he completely abandoned his princely existence. And he spent 6 years as an ascetic, a person denying himself. In fact, one of my favorite depictions of the Buddha is a sculpture where his ribs are quoted by his robes, but they echo his robes. I should have brought it up here. Because he was an ascetic. So the Buddha you see who's happy and laughing and chubby, that's a Chinese Buddha usually, and Buddhism has developed quite a bit since that time. The original Siddhartha, the original Buddha, was an ascetic. And so I love this image of his ribs showing through and his robes folding in parallel lines with his ribs. And he's engaging in various yogic disciplines, etc. He was a Hindu, just the way Jesus was a Jew. And eventually he approaches death because again, along the lines of legend, it was said that the Buddha ate 1 grain of rice a day. No, he didn't. But that's okay, because this is myth. This is not history. The point being, he was really good at being an ascetic. That's the point. That's why we use this hyperbole. So he accepts a bowl of rice from a young girl because he's about to die. And once he had eaten, he had a realization of the middle way, that this asceticism was not the path to enlightenment or to spiritual liberation of suffering. In fact, kind of enhances your suffering. At a place known as Bodh Gaya, the enlightenment place, he sat and meditated all night beneath a peepal tree. And after, this is actually, I'm skipping so much here, but you can look this up on your own. He defeated the forces of the demon Mara, and there's a great depiction of that. While he's meditating, all these forces arrayed against him in the form of the demon. He did reach enlightenment and became a Buddha, the enlightened one. That's what that means. At the age of 35. So, Courtney, are you 35 yet?
I'm getting there.
Just wait. Just wait. The Buddha continued to sit after his enlightenment, meditating beneath the Bodh tree and then standing beside it, the enlightenment tree, for a number of weeks. During the 5th or 6th weeks of his post-enlightenment meditation, he was beset by heavy rains while meditating, but was protected by the hood of the serpent King Mukalinda. Big serpent cobra comes up and covers him. You may have seen images of this, which is really powerful. 7 weeks after his enlightenment, he left his seat under the tree and decided to teach others what he had learned, encouraging people to follow the middle way. Not hedonism, not giving in to your desires, not ultimately repudiating your desires, but finding the middle way between those two extremes. He gave his first sermon in Deer Park in Sarnath, on the outskirts of the city of Benares. And he soon had many disciples and spent the next 40 years walking around northeastern India, spreading his teachings. He always presented himself as a teacher, not as a god or an object of worship. And he is said to have performed many miracles in his lifetime. Traditional accounts relate that he died at 80 in Kushnagara after ingesting a tainted piece of either mushroom or pork. His body was cremated and the remains distributed among the groups of his followers, and these holy relics were enshrined in large hemispherical burial mounds, the number of which at a number of important pilgrimage sites. In India, by the Pala period, 700 to 1200, the Buddha's life was codified into a series of 8 great events. These events are his birth, his defeat over Mara, the demon, and consequent enlightenment, his first sermon in Deer Park, the miracles he performed at Shravasti, which is his birthday, right? I think. His descent from the heaven of the 33 gods and his taming of a wild elephant, the monkey's gift of honey, and finally his death. All right, here's Buddhism in one slide. The Buddha taught the 4 noble truths. Now, the truths are noble, I think, but he probably meant truth for the noble ones. Remember, this is a Hindu religion, and it's being born into a caste system. So I think that's probably what he meant, and this actually gets into some interesting issues with seekers, and even our own founder, Manly Hall, and what does it mean to be a seeker? What does it mean to be a finder of something? Is it a secret? Are you a noble one? Actually, the Diamond Sutra gets into that quite a bit. So we'll see what he says about that. Life is suffering. Whenever I teach world religions, I always ask my students to disprove the first noble truth. Any religion that begins there, don't start me out in a garden where everything is perfect. Start me here. This I know. This I know to be true. Life is suffering. It's a genius beginning for 4 noble truths and for the birth of a religion. Suffering is caused by desire. I would also ask you to disprove this. What is called tanha in Sanskrit, burning. What kind of desire? The desire to have? Sure. But also the desire to be. Both kinds of desires cause you suffering. Again, the Diamond Sutra is going to work through this very beautifully. So, imagine how you suffer, why you suffer. I doubt you can not connect it to some desire. Maybe you can, I don't know. But the second noble truth is this: the suffering is caused by your desire to have and to be. And the good news doesn't come until the third noble truth, which is that the desire can be broken. This tanha can be broken. This connection, attachment to illusion, Maya, can be broken. Good. How? Please tell me how. What's the next step? By following the Eightfold Path. What is the Eightfold Path? Well, it's pretty standard, actually. Right view. I shouldn't diminish it. I don't mean to diminish it. It's not too surprising. And all religions, no matter how mystical or esoteric, usually come down to, okay, do this, right? Or unless you're a Taoist, then it's don't do this. Don't do anything. Right view. Yeah, right? You've got to have a right perspective on things, and you'll see that the Diamond Sutra is about that. Right intention. What is your intention? Oh my gosh. You ever think about your intention, especially with your words? What do you intend to say here? What is your intention that these words will do? The Buddha asks that you think about that on the Eightfold Path. And then what do you end up saying? Your right speech, your right action. What do you ultimately do? What kind of actions do you take? How do you make your livelihood? What kind of effort do you put forth and why? Mindfulness and concentration. And so meditation has always been a big part of Buddhism. Now I love this story of Buddhism because they're so messed up. And we think of Christian denominations, especially in Protestantism, and how frustrating that is. And it is, I'm sure. But I think it was less than a year after the Buddha died, there were 4 different sects of Buddhism. And then a couple of years later, there were 16, and they were all at war with each other. The Buddhists, right? Why? Because this is a phenomenon, and this is why we like to approach religions here in a comparative fashion, because you get to see things that you wouldn't see otherwise. This happens in every religion. The founder dies. It creates a crisis of the religion. And in fact, there are religions who have passed on, passed away, passed out of history that we don't know about because the founder died and that was it. In fact, all the odds were that that would have been Christianity, but there are a couple things that happened to make that possible and continue to exist. And just like in every religion, there is, now I'm not, by the way, I'm not the kind of person who says all religions are the same. They are not. But if you study Mircea Eliade and some of the other comparative religionists, including Joseph Campbell, you can see that there are forms and structures that are shared. And this is one of them. There's always a conservative, hold on to the original tradition group, and there's always a group that says, we've got to adapt to the world. We've got to acclimate to the world. And these two groups rarely get along. And so there's the Theravadan tradition in Buddhism, which says pretty much that you must be in the Sangha, the monastery, in order to practice Buddhism. I've got some great friends who are Theravadan. They exist in the monastery. They wear their saffron robes. They beg for food. And then there's the Mahayana tradition, or the expansive way. It's always the same. There's a contraction in a religion, such as Orthodox Judaism, and then there's an expansive tradition like Reform Judaism. This is true in Buddhism as well. And so, again, I'm not sure we would be talking about Buddhism without the expansive tradition, the tradition that goes beyond the culture, right? If you don't acclimate, there's a good chance of you dying off because you're really working against time, maybe even the nature of the world, which is, as Heraclitus reminded us last time, change. And so if you're trying to hold on to something and keep it from changing, you've really got your work cut out for you because the world keeps changing. And almost every time it changes, it's a threat to you if you're trying to hold on to this thing, right? So there are the two, basically the two. There are lots of different Buddhisms. There's almost a Buddhism for everything. There's a Buddhism that has a heaven. There's fundamentalist Buddhism. There's Zen, which it changes when it moves into China and when it moves into Japan. But tonight, our text is this. Isn't that awesome? What is that? Well, it happens to be the world's earliest dated printed book. This copy in the British Library, which one Chinese scholar said was stolen and being held in the British Library, is the world's earliest dated printed book. Now, I know we have a kind of origin story for print that involves Johann Gutenberg, who is a really interesting guy, by the way. Very, very much, a lot of legal trouble Gutenberg had, but he was able to create movable type. In 15th century. But the Chinese had been doing this for centuries already. Centuries. They had not movable type, but they had printing. And so this became, the Diamond Sutra became a central text of Indian Buddhism and was first translated from the Sanskrit into Chinese in about 400 of the Common Era. So about 400 when the Christian church is actually forming. Constantine has made Christianity the official religion of Rome, and the councils are starting to happen, and Christianity is forming. And here we have the Diamond Sutra being written, translated into Chinese. The Chinese had printing by the 8th century of the Common Era, using carved wooden blocks and an incredibly sophisticated technique. And I like this. The paper of the Buddhist sutras was usually dyed yellow before being inscribed, and the dye comes from the emmer cork tree, and it has insecticidal properties. How cool is that? It's a beautiful tree, isn't it? All right, so the text is printed on a scroll. As you saw, it's spread out there. I think it's about 17 feet long, as I recall, made of 7 panels of paper glued together. 40,000 scrolls like this were found in 1900 when the sealed-up door of a previously unknown cave, again, great stories, the previously unknown cave that was revealed during restoration work at a Buddhist monastery near the town of Dongwang in central China. The cave had been sealed in about 1000 and had remained hidden since, and the dry desert air and the insecticidal dye had made the text remain in perfect condition all that time for the paper and the silk scrolls. So, the Dunhuang, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, I don't know Mandarin or Cantonese, but the Dunhuang cave is amazing, and there was a Getty exhibit on this, and the site itself has a great website, and this is the one where the Diamond Sutra was found. So isn't that amazing? Sealed in 1000, opened up in 1900.
What we're seeing is in China?
Yes. And this site, which is Dunhuang, Dunhuang, I think I'll show you when I get out of this, has all the caves like this, and you've got various views. You've got a fisheye view, you've got a pinwheel view, and this is just amazing. So this is where technology is awesome. We're actually in this cave right now. And there are many. I'll use some more images from it as I go along. So there's the site, edunhuang.com, e-dunhuang, dunhuang.com. Amazing. And there's one of the images. All right. Now, this is interesting, too. It's the world's first printed, dated text. It also has a colophon and a copyright notice. Basically, it's a Creative Commons copyright from 868 in the colophon that says this: reverently made for universal free distribution by Wang Ji on behalf of his 2 parents, 11 May 868. Isn't that great? So Wang Ji would have acquired merit for this and for his parents. He does not say how many copies there are, but this does make this the earliest dated printed book in the world. So it's got the date there, it's got the translator, and by the way, this is our previous artist in residence, David Orr's depiction of the Great Wisdom Sutra, which is manipulated into a mandala, which is amazing, which you can find at davidorr.com. So all sutras begin with thus I have heard, or I've heard it this way. And think about what that does. That connects it to the teacher, because that is crucial, right? When the teacher dies, things fall apart. It doesn't matter if it's Muhammad or Siddhartha or Jesus, things fall apart because, all things flow, as Heraclitus said, and so you've got to constantly, okay, what about this? There's this new thing in the world, or there's this old thing in the world that we haven't experienced before, or now I'm just confused. What does this mean? Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, what does this mean? And if he's not there to answer you, then there's always someone who is. Well, I think the master meant this. Really? Why do you think that? I think he meant this. And here we go. And now we're off and running. So, thus have I heard, and you'll get this in some of the ancient texts, like the New Testament, where it's reflecting an oral tradition. And frankly, almost all of our sacred texts come from an oral tradition, and I could talk for an hour about the difference between the oral tradition and the written tradition, not to mention the printed tradition, but I won't do that tonight. And as we noted, this Diamond Sutra was given as a talk in Deer Park in northern India, and apparently there were over 1,000 monks there. And it takes the form of a dialogue between the Buddha and his disciple Subhuti. And so you'll hear this back and forth, which makes another point, if I may. The greatest way of learning in 868 or 2068 or 5068 BCE is conversation. It's the greatest way of learning. It always has been. Because it's an immediate encounter with the other through language. And Plato knew this. That's why Plato's philosophy is not treatises of philosophy, it's dialogues, right? He would call it dialectic. He has a particular way of thinking what's happening there, that you're kind of building towards some truth. Doesn't matter. Dialogue, back and forth. What we're doing is the way to wisdom, and it always has been. I don't know if it always will be. AI, VR, I don't know. But for now, and for centuries, and for millennia, it has been dialogue. There's my favorite philosopher, is a Russian philosopher named Mikhail Bakhtin, and he has a whole philosophy built on this notion. And I've said it before, but I'll say it again. One of my favorite lines of his is that when we stare at each other, two different worlds are reflected in the pupils of our eyes. When we stare at each other, two different worlds. I can see things behind you that you can't see. You can see things behind me that I can't see. We need each other to consummate, that's Bakhtin's word. We need that, each other's perspective to consummate the world. Otherwise, our worlds are fragmented. We need the other. We need dialogue. All right. That was a long monologue on dialogue. Now, this is the actual Diamond Sutra. It's beautiful. But these are texts for chanting, right? So that's another great way to convey information in an oral culture, is to sing it. And in fact, our first spoken interactions were no doubt song in some way. Suzanne Langer has a great book on this called Philosophy in a New Key. It seems pretty evident that pitches in language would be important, and a kind of form to the language is going to be important, even if it's rudimentary, even if it's primal language. There's got to be some form to it, or it's not going to work. And so, to sing a text is to know it, even if you don't intend to. It just gets absorbed, right? Like, I know the words to every Jackson Browne song ever. I didn't set out to do this. I hope he's pleased, but I didn't mean to. I simply loved his music and listened to it, and I've got it now. Some of you, are elderly gentlemen like me, and you may have learned the alphabet this way. You sang a song. Do you remember this? Yeah, you sang a song. How cool is that? But that's oral culture being used to initiate you into literate culture. It's interesting. So here's about 3 minutes of the chanting led by a monk. This is right at the end of the Diamond Sutra. The whole thing's about 30 minutes. This is the last 3. All right. Let's get to the ways of wisdom and hear the Diamond Sutra. And this is chapters 1 and 2. This is what I heard, right? There's the opening. Thus have I have heard. At one time, the Buddha was staying in the Jeta Grove near the city of Shravasti. With him there was a community of 1,250 venerable monks and devoted disciples. One day, before dawn, the Buddha clothed himself and along with his disciples took up his alms bowl and entered the city to beg for food door to door, as was his custom. After he had returned and eaten, he put away the bowl and cloak, bathed his feet, and then sat with his legs crossed and body upright upon the seat arranged for him. He began mindfully fixing his attention in front of himself, while many monks approached the Buddha and, showing great reverence, seated themselves around him. After a time, a most venerable monk named Subhuti, who was sitting in the congregation, rose from his seat. He uncovered his right shoulder, placed his right knee on the ground, and as he joined his palms together, he respectfully bowed and addressed the Buddha. Most honored one, it is truly majestic how much knowledge and wisdom your monks and disciples have been given through your most inspired teachings. It is remarkable that you look after our welfare so selflessly and so completely. Most honored one, I have a question to ask you. If sons and daughters of good families want to develop the highest, most fulfilled and awakened mind, if they wish to attain the highest perfect wisdom, what should they do to help quiet their drifting minds and help subdue their craving thoughts? You can hear the culture in that question, right? People of high families, right? Noble ones, truths for the noble ones. The Buddha then replied, "So it is as you say, Subhuti. Monks and disciples have been favored with the highest favor by the Buddha. The monks and disciples have been instructed with the highest instruction by the Buddha. The Buddha is constantly mindful of the welfare of his followers. Listen carefully with your full attention, and I will answer your question. If sons and daughters of good families want to develop the highest, most fulfilled and awakened mind, if they wish to attain the highest perfect wisdom," see, that this repetition you're hearing, that's part of an oral culture, because you have to repeat things in an oral culture to hold on to them. "Then they should follow what I'm about to say to you. Those who follow what I'm about to say here will be able to subdue their discriminative thoughts and craving desires, tanha. It is possible to attain perfect tranquility and clarity of mind by absorbing and dwelling on the teachings I'm about to give." Then the Buddha addressed the assembly. So never let anyone tell you that the ancient texts do not employ rhetoric. They do. That's a brilliant opening, right? You start with a grand entrance, you have a devoted student who asks the questions, and the teacher says, "Oh, well, I'd be happy to ask that question. Settle in. Here we go." And indeed, here we go. All living beings, the Buddha said, whether born from eggs or the womb, from moisture or spontaneously, whether they have form or do not have form, whether they are aware or unaware, whether they are not aware or not unaware, all living beings will eventually be led by me to the final nirvana, the final ending of the cycle of birth and death. And when this is unfathomable, infinite number of living beings have all been liberated. In truth, not even a single being has actually been liberated. All right. So first of all, nirvana does not mean what you think it means. Well, it does if you're thinking of the band. But in Sanskrit, it means, remember what tanha was? Desire, flame, craving, burning. Nirvana means to extinguish. Just to extinguish. It does not mean heaven. It means to end suffering by ending desire. Now later it'll mean all kinds of things, because you fill all kinds of meanings into these teachings, but nirvana itself means to extinguish. All right. So when this unfathomable, infinite number of living beings have all been liberated, in truth, not even a single being has actually been liberated. I often say that postmodernism in the West is a way to wisdom. If this isn't postmodernism, I don't know what it is. He's messing with language. Well, postmodern, yeah, not in terms of dates, but in terms of function of postmodernism. Using language against itself to get you something, to get you somewhere greater. To use irony. Not a single being has been liberated. Yes, all beings will be liberated. You may know that in Japan, they developed these little riddles called koans. And it's the same thing. It's exactly what the Buddha's doing here. He's deconstructing language to get you beyond your words, which is to get you beyond your thoughts, because your thoughts are made of words. Two of the famous koans are, what is the sound of one hand clapping? Another is, show me the face you had before you were born. And students in Zen will go off and try to answer that question, spending years sometimes trying to answer the koan. What's the answer? Depends on the master and how much you've progressed in letting go of your thoughts. So, yeah.
Is there a place beyond the thoughts?
Yes.
There is, but where is it and what is it? Is that articulatable?
I will articulate it the way Lao Tzu did. He who says does not know, and he who knows does not say. But he said that, so you can say that you can't say. And that's about as far as you can get. Now, here's what else you can do, I think, is you can use music, and you can use art. You can use image and sound and other things. I think they actually take you further toward the one, toward the transcendent, toward the sacred, than words do. What do you think? The chapter 3 ends this way. Why, Subhuti? Yes, I'm asking why, Master. Because if a disciple still clings to the arbitrary illusions of form, this may answer your question. I should have let the Buddha answer it. Because if a disciple still clings to the arbitrary illusions of form or phenomena, such as an ego, a personality, a self, a separate person, or a universal self existing eternally, then that person is not an authentic disciple. As one of my monk friends in the Sangha used to say, Pramangang, if you're listening, what's up? Used to say, no self, no problem. All right, stay with us here. The Buddha's going to teach you. Yeah, there's from the caves too. All right. Subhuti respectfully asked the Lord Buddha, Most Honored One, in the future, if a person hears this teaching, even if it is only a phrase or a sentence, is it possible for that person to have a true faith and knowledge of enlightenment awaken in his mind? The Buddha says, without a doubt, Subhuti, even 500 years after the enlightenment of this Buddha, there will be some who are virtuous and wise, and while practicing compassion and charity, will believe in the words and phrases of this sutra and will awaken their minds purely. After they come to hear these teachings, they will be inspired with belief. This is because when some people hear these words, they will have understood intuitively that these words are truth. Intuitively, right? You can't be reasoned to the truth of Buddhism. In fact, reason is the obstacle. They will understand intuitively that these words are the truth. But you must also remember, Subhuti, the Buddha continues, that such persons have long ago planted the seeds of goodness and merit that lead to this realization. They have planted the seeds of good deeds and charity, not simply before one Buddhist temple or 2 temples or 5, but before hundreds of thousands of Buddhas and temples. So when a person who hears the words and phrases of this sutra is ready for it to happen, a pure faith and clarity can awaken their minds. Subhuti, any person who awakens faith upon hearing the words or phrases of this sutra will accumulate countless blessings and merit. How do I know this? Because this person must have discarded all arbitrary notions of existence, of the existence of a personal self. This is why the Buddha is sometimes said to have taught anatman. The Upanishads teach atman as an expression of Brahman, the one. The Buddha, and this is where Buddhism departs from Hinduism, is he teaches anatman, no self, no problem. That person must have discarded all arbitrary notions of the existence of a personal self or other people or a universal self. There's a swipe at Brahman. Otherwise, their minds would still grasp after such relative conceptions. Furthermore, these people must have already, is he repeating himself there? Yeah. Therefore, anyone who seeks total enlightenment should discard, all right, let me just, hold on, catch this. Therefore, Anyone who seeks total enlightenment should discard not only all conceptions of their own selfhood, of other selves, or of a universal self. They should also discard all notions of the non-existence of such concepts. Welcome to Buddhism. When the Buddha explains these things, I loved it. Here the Buddha is postmodern. When the Buddha explains these things using concepts and ideas, people should remember the unreality of all such concepts and ideas. You can go straight from there to Jacques Derrida. They should recall that in teaching spiritual truths, the Buddha always uses these concepts and ideas, I love this, in the way that a raft is used to cross the river. Once the river has been crossed, the raft is of no more use and should be discarded. These arbitrary concepts and ideas about spiritual things need to be explained to us, yes, as we seek to attain enlightenment. However, ultimately, these arbitrary conceptions can be discarded. Think, Subhuti, isn't it even more obvious that we should also give up our conceptions of non-existent things? I often wonder, I came to this truth late in my life as an elderly gentleman. I often wonder if I could have grasped this sooner, how my life would have been different. Because so much of my life, as I look back on the many, many years, is that I was walking around with a raft on my back. You know, I had crossed the river, but I wouldn't let go of the raft, and it made for very difficult travel to carry a raft around when you're not on the water. Maybe you've got a raft on your back still. This is a beautiful Buddha. Chapter 8. Damn. This is the problem with getting fancy with slides. Okay. Let me ask you, Subhuti, says the Buddha, if a person filled over 10, I love this story, this is so fun. If a person filled over 10,000 galaxies, 10,000 galaxies, with 7 treasures for the purpose of compassion, charity, and giving alms, would this person not gain great merit and spread much happiness? Yes, most honored one. This person would gain great merit and spread much happiness, even though, see, Subhuti is catching on, in truth, this person does not have a separate existence to which merit could accrue. Why? Because this person's merit is characterized with the quality of not being merit. I get you. The Buddha continued, then suppose another person understood only 4 lines of this sutra, but nevertheless took it upon themselves to explain these lines to someone else. This person's merit would be even greater than the other person's. I guess my merit is very high tonight because I'm explaining this to you. Why? Because all Buddhas and all the teachings and values of the highest, most fulfilled, most awakened minds arise from the teachings in the sutra. And yet, even as I speak, Subhuti, I must take back my words as soon as they are uttered, for there are no Buddhas and there are no teachings. Let go of the raft. By the way, if you're thinking this is very similar to the Tao Te Ching, you would be right. It is indeed. And it is characteristic of much Eastern thinking. Subhuti, here we go again. If there were as many Ganges rivers as the number of grains of sand in the Ganges, would you say that the number of grains in sand in all those Ganges rivers would be very many? It's a trick, Subhuti, don't answer. Subhuti answered, very many indeed, most honor one. If the number of Ganges rivers were that large, how much more so would be the number of grains of sand in all those Ganges rivers? Subhuti, I will declare a truth to you. if a good man or a good woman, by the way, the Buddha was especially inclusive of women, which was unheard of during the Axial Age. He is unique in that. If a good man or a good woman filled over 10,000 galaxies of worlds with the 7 treasures for each grain of sand and all those Ganges rivers, and gave it all away for the purpose of compassion, charity, and giving alms, would this man or woman not gain merit and spread much happiness? Very much so, most honored Buddha. Subhuti, if after studying and observing even a single stanza of this sutra, another person were to explain it to others, the happiness and merit that would result from this virtuous act of explaining this sutra would be greater than all those grains of sand. There's the cave again. Subhuti said to the Buddha, "By what name shall we know this sutra, so that it can be honored and studied?" I love it when a sacred text refers to itself. It's a really interesting phenomenon. The Popol Vuh of the Maya does this. The Lord Buddha replied, "This sutra shall be known as the diamond that cuts through illusion." Indeed. By this name it shall be revered and studied and observed. What does this name mean? It means that when the Buddha named it, he did not have in mind any definite or arbitrary conception, and so named it. This sutra is hard and sharp, like a diamond that will cut away all arbitrary conceptions and bring one to the other shore of enlightenment. What do you think, Subhuti? Has the Buddha taught any definite teaching in this sutra? No. Lord Buddha has not taught any definite teaching in the sutra? What do you think, Subhuti? Are there many particles of dust in this vast universe? Yes, most honored one? Subhuti, when the Buddha speaks of particles of dust, it does not mean I am thinking of any definite thought. I am merely using these words as a figure of speech. This is a refrain in this sutra. I'm merely using this as a figure of speech. They are not real particles of dust. They are not real, only illusion. It's just the same with the word universe. These words do not assert any definite or arbitrary idea. I'm only using the words as words. Right? Okay. Subhuti, what do you think? Can the Buddha be perceived by means of his 32 physical characteristics? No. I'm going to say no, most honored one. The Buddha cannot be perceived by his 32 physical characteristics. Why? Because the Buddha teaches that they are not real, but they are merely called the 32 physical characteristics. Just using words as words. Subhuti, if a good and faithful person, whether male or female, has, for the sake of compassion and charity, been sacrificing their life for generation upon generation, for as many generations as the grains of sands in the 3,000 universes, and another follower has been studying and observing even a single section of this sutra and explains it to others, that person's blessings and merit would be even greater. You get this refrain in the New Testament 600 years later, by the way. It's a very good rhetorical device.
Greg, if there's no self, who gets the merit? Where's the merit?
The merit's an illusion. It's a raft. Yeah. But you've got to start somewhere, and you can't start there. You've got to start where you are with illusion, with Maya. It's a good question, though. At that time, after listening to this sutra, Subhuti had understood its profound meaning and was moved to tears. He said, "What a rare and precious thing it is that you should deliver such a deeply profound teaching. Since the day I attained the eyes of understanding, thanks to the guidance of the Buddha, I have never before heard teachings so deep and so wonderful as these. Most honored one, if someone hears the sutra and has pure and clear confidence in it, they will have profound insight into the truth. Having perceived that profound insight, that person will realize the rarest kind of virtue, Most honored one, that insight into the truth is essentially not insight into the truth, but what the Buddha calls insight into the truth. He's trying to be a good student. Most honored one, having listened to this sutra, I am able to receive and retain it with faith and understanding. This is not difficult for me, but in ages to come, in the last 500 years, if there's a person who hears this sutra, so he's repeating, retains it with faith, that person will be a rare one, a person of remarkable achievement. Such a person will be able to awaken pure faith because they've ceased to cherish any arbitrary notions of their selfhood, other selves, living beings, or universal self. And he repeats what the Buddha said. The Buddha replied, so it is, Subhuti, good job. Most wonderfully blessed will be those beings who, on hearing this sutra will not tremble, nor be frightened, or terrified in any way. And why? Because the Buddha has taught this sutra as the highest perfection. And what the Buddha teaches as the highest perfection, that also the innumerable blessed Buddhas, plural, do teach. Therefore, it is called the highest perfection. And then the Buddha goes on here, and I love this line here. I remember, Subhuti, during my 500 previous lives, because as you've gathered here, samsara, the Hindu notion of the kind of wandering across lifetimes, is essential to the understanding of Buddhism. I also remember, Subhuti, that during my 500 previous lives, I had used life after life to practice patience and to look upon my life humbly, as though I were a saint called upon to suffer humility. Even then, my mind was free of arbitrary conceptions of the phenomena of myself, of being a soul or a universal self. And so he encourages Subhuti to leave behind all distractions of phenomena and awaken the thought of attainment of supreme enlightenment. And the disciple should do this by not allowing his mind to depend upon ideas evoked by the world of the senses, because that world is Maya. By not allowing their mind to depend upon ideas stirred by sounds, odors, flavor, sensory touch, or any qualities. The disciple's mind should be kept independent of any thoughts that might arise within it. If the disciple's mind depends upon anything in the sensory realm, it will have no solid foundation in any reality. How's that for a scientific statement? This is why the Buddha teaches that the mind of the disciple should not accept Maya. But you still practice compassion and charity for the welfare of all living beings. Why? Because they suffer. Just as the Buddha declares that form is not form, so he also declares that all living beings are, in fact, not living beings. All right. I think you get the idea. So let me skip through to the end, and we can talk about this. So this is our passage. So you should view this fleeting world. Actually, let me read you the whole chapter. Buddha continued, Subhuti, if anyone gave to the Buddha an immeasurable quality of the 7 treasures sufficient to fill the whole universe, and if another person, whether a man or woman, in seeking to attain complete enlightenment, were to earnestly and faithfully observe and study even a single section of this sutra and explain it to others, the accumulated blessing and merit of that latter person would be far greater. Subhuti, how can one explain this sutra to others without holding in mind any arbitrary conceptions of forms or phenomena or spiritual truths? It can only be done, Subhuti, by keeping the mind in perfect tranquility and free from any attachment to appearances. So I say to you, this is how to contemplate our conditioned existence in this world, like a tiny drop of dew or a bubble floating in a stream, like a flash of lightning in a summer cloud, or a flickering lamp, an illusion, a phantom, or a dream. so is all conditioned existence to be seen. Thus spoke Buddha. Thank you for your attention.